Hello and welcome to the Holistic Menopause Solutions Summit, where you'll discover fresh, practical ways to calm the chaos of midlife, boost your energy, and feel at home in your body again. I'm Eliza Riley, founder of Menopause and Chill, and I'm honored to be your host for the summit. Today, I am joined by Katie Barngrover. Katie is a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and the founder of Angel Wing Health. After struggling for years with fatigue, stubborn weight, and chronic sleep issues she thought were just part of being a busy mom, Katie uncovered the real root causes using functional lab testing and coaching. Now she helps women in midlife restore deep, restful sleep, reclaim their energy, and finally feel like themselves again without burning out or guessing their way through the process. Katie, I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here too.
Now, this is a conversation that I know so many of our viewers have been waiting for and are excited to get into. So let's jump right in. We're going to start with a big question. So many women are told that sleep is just going to get worse, especially after menopause, and that it's something that we just have to get comfortable with and live with. Why do you challenge that idea, and what's actually going on behind the scenes?
It is a great question. And so I want to start with an analogy. I like to think of the stress in our body as being filled into a bucket. So when we're born, our stress bucket is empty or nearly empty, depending on what we were exposed to in the womb. And as we go through life, we start putting things in our bucket. These are toxins. These are, maybe some infections here and there. These are some alcohol. These are, all of like too much exercise, not enough sleep, all the things we do. And our drain in our bucket is our body's way of processing these toxins and removing them from the body. And so ideally, what goes in comes out and the bucket stays empty. But as we progress through life, our drain starts to get a little clogged up. We stop sleeping so much. We start overwhelming our liver. It starts getting congested. We can't detox as much as we should. And then we start turning the faucets up. Life gets more stressful and we start adding more things to the bucket. When we're younger, we don't really notice the effects that these behaviors are having on our body because our bucket isn't full. We only see symptoms when our bucket starts to overflow and it starts to splash out of the bucket. And so round about our 30s or 40s, we start to, have aches and pains we didn't used to have. We start to have excess weight we can't get rid of. We start to not sleep as well as we used to sleep. And what's really going on is the bucket has filled up, and now these stressors we're adding are causing things to splash out of the bucket. And so when we go through menopause, which is a huge stressful event on the body, now our bucket is really full. And so everything we're doing is overflowing the bucket and causing symptoms to the body. And so from my philosophy, what we really need to do is open up those drains, turn down those faucets, and help the body return to homeostasis. And so even if you're in the middle of menopause or you're postmenopausal, that is still totally possible for you. Now, we know that menopause affects our hormones, and there are two key hormones that I'm going to talk a lot about today. The first one is cortisol, and the second one is melatonin. And these are hormones that should work in opposition to each other. Our cortisol should be highest 30 minutes after we wake, and it should drop and be at its lowest point 3 to 4 hours after we go to sleep. And our melatonin should be highest 3 to 4 hours after we go to sleep, and at its lowest middle of the day. And so our stress, our hormone imbalances from menopause, are going to increase our cortisol, which is going to mean a higher speed of that faucet. Higher cortisol is going to suppress our melatonin, which is going to affect our quality and our quantity of sleep. And so when we're in the middle of menopause, this is not doom and gloom. So a lot of people can start to address it with hormone replacement therapy, which is not my expertise at all. But we also know that metabolically healthy women manage menopause better than women who are not metabolically healthy. And so that's where I believe we have a lot of room to work. If we can optimize metabolic health by eating the right foods, by finding an exercise routine that actually works for you in the way that your body works, by reducing stress, physical stressors like gut imbalance, chronic infections, old injuries, by reducing environmental stressors like toxins, lack of sunlight, too much blue light, by reducing emotional stressors, things like relationships that are a little wonky, finding that you don't have purpose anymore, optimizing sleep, which helps detox and repair, we can get all those drains kind of cleaned out and start lowering that stress level in our bucket and start to receive more restorative sleep.
That makes total sense. And what came to my mind whenever you were saying that, the bucket analogy, I just love that. First off, by the way, it makes so much sense to me. I think though that what happens at menopause, I'm not challenging you, but I think that what happens at menopause is that the bucket actually gets a little smaller. Like it
Well,
actually
that might be true too.
now suddenly everything just seems like it's overflowing when it shouldn't have, or when it didn't necessarily before. It's crazy.
Yes. Yeah, I like to think of like menopause. So if your bucket was 7/8 full,
Uh-huh.
I was a former math teacher in my prior
Sure.
life, so I get a little nerdy, but if your bucket was 7/8 full before menopause, well, that hormone change is so stressful on the body that whoop, there you go. You just
Yeah.
filled the rest up.
Build it.
And now
Done.
you've got, you got a lot of work to do. But I mean, it's totally possible, I think. So
It is. Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. So when it comes to sleep problems, I know that there's a difference between people who can't fall asleep and people who wake up in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep. Can you
mhm.
tell us about the different root causes for these patterns?
Yeah, so they're actually both related to those hormones that I was just talking about, to cortisol and to melatonin. Now, people who can't fall asleep typically have their cortisol, which is the fight or flight hormone. Their cortisol is elevated at bedtime. They have done something to make their bodies ramp up, and now they're too awake to fall asleep. People who can't stay asleep often have done something later in the evening and the cortisol response is delayed. So they can go to sleep, but then they have a cortisol response late at night, early in the morning that then wakes them up. And so they're different times, and what causes the cortisol response can be different, but really they're often the same underlying phenomenon that's happening in the body. So some things that can cause those to show up, cause those cortisol spikes to show up, are things like food sensitivities, foods you shouldn't be eating, your body doesn't want you to eat in the afternoon, or toxin exposure in the afternoon that you weren't exposed to earlier in the day. Those can create spikes late in the evening, which can keep you awake. And when the reason that's an issue is that when your cortisol spikes, it makes your melatonin depress, and melatonin is what makes you want to fall asleep. That's why people like to take melatonin supplements. But if you don't fix the cortisol issue, you're not actually solving the problem.
Yeah.
So another one is alcohol, sugar, caffeine. Taking those in the evening, we all know no caffeine, but alcohol also, those are gonna, as they go through the digestive system, they are going to prompt a cortisol response, but that's a delayed response because it takes a while to process through the body. Another one can be chronic infection. If your body, so in the late night, your body is trying to detoxify, trying to fight infection, trying to clean up things. And so if your body's fight with some type of chronic infection gets too big, the army starts making too much of a mess, cortisol is flagged, and now you have a cortisol response at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning that wakes you up. Histamine is another one. I like to call histamine like the the partier there. He makes a giant mess. He has a very big purpose in the body, but he makes a great big mess. And if you have too much histamine, when the janitors come in to clean up after the party, they revolt and you get a cortisol response. And there you go, waking up again in the middle of the night. So yeah, those are some differences and kind of similarities there too.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And there's a couple of things that made me think of. One of them is we actually had another expert talking about the toxic load that is in even our skincare products. So like if you're slathering on all this stuff before you go to bed, and then you fall asleep but can't stay asleep, it
Yep,
could very well be just what you're putting on your skin. And
100% yes.
yeah, and then the other thing was, alcohol. Most people think that alcohol helps you to fall asleep.
Mhm. And
And
it
that's
might.
true. Yeah, yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
But it will keep you from staying asleep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly right. Yes. And I have some tricks for that a little bit later too that we can.
Okay.
I mean, ideally we would just give it up, but if that's not an option, we have some alternatives that might at least improve things. So,
Well, I think it's so important to just be able to make the connections. So like if you know having that glass of wine with dinner is going to keep you from sleeping well at night, and you know you have to be up early in the morning, maybe you skip it. But if you
mhm.
know that you get to sleep in tomorrow, and you're okay with the consequences, then enjoy your glass of wine and don't stress about it, because that's just going to make it worse.
Exactly. I just had that very conversation with a client about 30 minutes ago.
Yes, we
He
keep
had a
having
glass
these
of wine
conversations.
or a glass of tequila and said, "Man, I paid for it last night." And I said, "Well, you're aware of what it causes. Like that's the
Exactly.
point, is to bring awareness to the behaviors that might be affecting your sleep and give you back control, and then you get to make those choices."
Absolutely.
So.
So for someone who's listening who is really not sleeping well, what are some of the most obvious things that they should look at first? Like what is often overlooked? And I know we talked about a few, like the alcohol and the toxins just now, but what else? What is there?
So I have a big list. So if you got a pen and paper, now's a great time to write these down because I just couldn't stop. And there's more than what I'm just going to share here, but there's a lot. So the very first place that we would begin is like a big umbrella. And I want you to think about all the activities that you're doing that are leading up to and including your bedtime. Now, one caveat I want to put in here. I suspect that we have a few people in the audience who would describe themselves as night owls. And I want to challenge them. Biologically, there is no such thing as a night owl. If you go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and you don't get up until 11 o'clock in the morning, your circadian rhythm is disrupted and you are messing with a whole lot of things in your body, even if that's when you feel your best. And so as we go on, I want to talk about a few things that you can do to start trying to understand how that's not working for your body and try to shift that. But I don't think that's most of us. Most of us probably go to bed between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., which is what we want to see happen. But what if you lay there? You go to bed and you just stare at the ceiling and you can't go to sleep. So take an inventory of the types of lights that you're exposed to. Do you have a room full of LED lights? Are they ambient lights? Are they red lights? Take a look at the stress that you're under after dinner as you're leading up to bedtime. That was a great awakening for me when I realized that as we were talking earlier, I am an older mom. My children are still relatively little. And we would go through dinner, we'd have dinner as a family at the table, everything would be grand, I'd be all peaceful. And then would come the monster list of things that have to happen before bed. And my stress level would just go through the roof. And I had to find ways to manage that, get all the to-dos done, but bring the stress level down so I would quit disrupting my sleep. So pay attention to those things. And it wasn't even like fight or flight, I got to run kind of stress. It just was an elevation that was affecting my sleep. Let's see. So another thing, do you work out in the evenings? High intensity training is going to cause a cortisol response. Now, if that's the only time you can work out, you may have to balance between this is really good for me and I'm just going to have to adjust for sleep. But if you can do high intensity training earlier in the day, other forms of exercise later in the evening, yoga, walking, those are great because they don't raise the cortisol so high. So that might be another piece. Screens, looking at any type of screen, which I know we hear a lot about, but I want to do a little bit of science for you. Screens produce the same wavelength of blue light as the sun does between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And so when we are getting blue light screens, light into our eyeballs, after dark, we are sending the signal to our brain that it is the middle of the day. We have these magical little cells in our eyes that are called melanopsin cells. Sachin Panda, who's a PhD and a sleep researcher, has done a lot of work on these guys. And these cells tell our body which activities to start to ramp up and which activities to suppress based entirely on the wavelength of the blue light that they are receiving. And so when we are sending our body middle of the day light waves at dark, it is ramping up our hunger. It is telling us that we are supposed to be ready for fight or flight because we need to be alert for the saber-toothed tiger genetically, from go past. All of these daytime activities that we're supposed to be doing, the melanospin cells are confused. And when we get that blue light after dark. And so we really need to tone down the blue lights. The ideal way to do that is to wear a quality blue light blocker. They need to have amber lenses, not yellow or white, because yellow and white still let some of that blue light wavelength in. The amber ones block out all of the blue light. And really, ideally, you're doing it from sunset until you are in bed with the lights off. Another trick that you can do is get outside at dawn when the sun is first peeking up. And then again at sunset when the sun is just going down. But you have to do it without glasses. No sunglasses, no reading glasses. Like you have to have your eyes open to the light. And again, it goes back to those melanopsin cells. They need to see those wavelengths. And that first morning light is exactly what your eyes need to say, oh, we're supposed to open the kitchen. And now we have to get the energy ramped up. And when you dive right into noonday sunlight by going into your kitchen with all the bright lights on, you're kind of skipping all of that early morning prep work that your body should be doing. And so I've heard of people just taking their toothbrush and going outside and standing outside and brushing their teeth and getting the sunlight in their eyes. Like, it's a great way to do that. And keep in mind, when it's overcast, it doesn't matter. As long as it's not pitch dark outside, the blue light that your eyes need, that your melanopsin cells need, is still coming through the clouds and still getting to your eyeballs. So it's absolutely do it even when it's not light out. Do you want me to keep going, or is that, I've got a whole bunch more, but I can.
That is a great list so far.
Okay.
It's entirely up to you. We can continue going, or I can go to the next question.
Okay, I'll do a few more.
Okay.
Another one is create your sleep sanctuary. Now, I have a whole bunch of things that I'm not going to talk about today, that I could talk about for maximizing your sleep sanctuary. But if you opened up my free resource, there was 3 hacks in there, so check those out. So a few tricks for now, though, are put up black light or blackout curtains. Remove any ambient light. So the little blue lights that are on the TVs that you like to plug in the alarm clock, like, get rid of those. Move your phone away from the head of your bed, and then drop the temperature in your room. Between 64 and 67 is ideal. What we want to have happen at night is we want the internal body temperature to drop drastically. It's not a large quantity, but it's fast is what we want to have happen, and that stimulates all of the reset processes at night. And so when your room is colder, you can make that drop happen quicker. We talked about alcohol, sugar, coffee. If you're going to do it before dinner or do it with dinner. Don't do it after dinner, but don't increase the amount you're going to have just because you started earlier. Make sure you stop with the 1 or 2, because the food will help slow the absorption. Some of it will even pass through the digestive system and won't get absorbed. And so you won't have such the large burden on your liver, which causes the cortisol response. Last one, eating too late. Your biggest meal should be breakfast, with your next biggest meal being lunch, and you should have, if you're going to have it at all, have a light dinner. You want to stop eating anything 3 hours before bedtime. And that means even 1 chocolate chip. Like, that restarts the whole digestive system, and that delays a whole lot of things, which I could talk about a little bit more later. But
That's a great list, and hopefully we were able to get them noted.
There's a bunch there.
There are, but they're all really good, and any one of those can make such a huge difference in whether or not you are falling asleep easily and staying asleep throughout the night.
Absolutely. And then all together, I mean, if you can do 2 or 3, you're game changing.
So once someone suspects, I'm sorry, let me go back one. I know that you did share so many different ways that sleep can become an issue, but what are some of the sneakier culprits that most people never think to check?
Yeah, that's another great question. A lot of people try a lot of things and they're just not sure what to do. One that's really a sneaky culprit is food sensitivities. We like to eat things that our body doesn't like. We like to avoid things that our body really wants. We don't like to eat things, but we often do eat things that the greater society says we should because they're good for us, but we don't really like to eat them. Those are all disrupting our bodies. Every body is unique in what it wants for fuel, what it wants for nutrients. I don't mean vitamin C and vitamin D and all those things. I mean, I can get mine from carrots versus you should get yours from broccoli. We all have different ways that our body wants to collect nutrients. And if we ignore those subtle signals, it actually can disrupt a whole lot of things in our body. It increases our cortisol response. It can lead to leaky gut. It affects our digestion, and all of those things point directly to disrupted sleep. And so if you're not sure what's going on, getting food sensitivity testing can be really helpful. Another one we kind of touched on is snacking. Bedtime snacks do not help with sleep. I had a great analogy, but for sake of time, I think I'll skip it. The point is, it takes time for your digestive system to ramp up and to shut down. And it becomes a high priority action for your body, but it's supposed to stop before bedtime so that the rest of your detoxification processes can happen while you are sleeping. And so if you eat something, even 1 slice of apple, even 1 little piece of cheese before bedtime, you've turned on the whole kitchen again, and it has to do all of the ramping up, all of the digesting. And despite what we think, 1 little thing in the belly doesn't go through substantially faster than a larger meal. The stomach is kind of on a timer. And, and so it takes hours to go through that process. And that has to finish before your body can shift into the rest. And so if it doesn't have time to do the rest of the list at night, things like detoxification and repair work get left for tomorrow. And that's just not any good. And another really fascinating one for our specific target audience today is as we age, our sleep becomes more easily disrupted. Sounds and lights intrude into and pull us out of deep sleep more quickly and more easily. Now, they may not actually pull you into consciousness, but they can pull you out of deep, restful, restorative sleep into the lighter forms of sleep, making you wake up in the morning going, gosh, I slept for 8 or 9 hours, but I just don't feel great. And so a suggestion there might be to try a sleep mask and earplugs. They take a little getting used to, but they can be game changers as we age and our sleep just becomes more sensitive to those things. And then another kind of, we talked about screens a little bit, but some people like to think, I just have to have screens to wind down and it doesn't affect my sleep. I sleep fine. But like I was already talking about, the screens send your body the signal that it is the middle of the day. And so
Right.
whether or not you feel like your nighttime 10 o'clock to 8 o'clock sleep is being disrupted, it is affecting your rhythms. And so unless you are 100% healthy, if you have any digestive issues, any energy issues, any aches and pains in your joints, those screens at night are affecting your patterns, your rhythms. And so you really should stop that or take action steps to reduce that impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I so appreciate that. And I feel like you covered several of them, but once someone has, identified one of these mystery causes as the reason why they're not sleeping, what are some action steps they can take to start moving towards better sleep?
Okay. So we talked about food sensitivities first, and the first place I would start with that is testing, but I'd be really careful about the testing. There are 3 types of food sensitivity testings. There's one called a mediator release test, and there are 2 that are antibody tests, an IgE and an IgG test. And I'm going to go into those just a little bit so you understand what you're getting with each of those, because I think they have different benefits. And if you're looking for better sleep, I think one is better than the others. So the IgE test is the skin prick test. That's the one where you go in and they scratch your skin to see if you puff up, right? So that test is testing for an immediate histamine response. And what that is telling you is that your bucket is nearly full or almost full, and we're throwing in these rocks and we're going to see what kind of splashes we get out of it. And so in reality there, it's not necessarily telling us that these things are major problems for your body. It's just saying you're full and now we're splashing over. And so we need to open up the drain and we need to turn down the faucets. And it can be helpful, but because anything can be making you splash at that point, it's not necessarily a guarantee that those things are your solutions. So the second one is the IgG test, which is another antibody test. And this guy comes from a blood draw or a finger stick. If you've ever dripped the dots on the paper, that's usually this test. And most people say, well, if it's an antibody test, like if I got antibodies, then it says my body doesn't like it. And that's sort of true. So the antibodies in the body, the IgG antibodies, can identify both the bad guys, so the foods that your body really doesn't like, but they also flag trash. And that distinction is different. Blah, blah, blah. Let me try that sentence again. That distinction is important because trash doesn't cause inflammation and a cortisol response, whereas bad guys do. And so on that result, we can't tell which of those are trash and which of those are the bad guys. So we get rid of all of them. We're like, well, if it's trash, shouldn't I get rid of it anyway? And that's fine. Yes, you can reduce the stress on your body by getting rid of the trash too. But it's usually a big list. And so it can be really overwhelming to feel like you have to get rid of all of these things. And when we live on a really restricted diet, we find it really hard to maintain that long term. So then you want to start adding things back, but you don't know which ones were actually the bad guys versus which ones were just the garbage. And so, and same thing when you're trying to cheat and have a snack day or whatever, you don't know which ones are really going to cause a problem. And you know, a lot of people would say, but there's red ones and then there's yellow ones. And so shouldn't it be the red ones that are the bad guys? But that's not how antibodies work. Think about when you have the flu, 2 days after you have the flu, your antibody titer is going to be enormous because your body just created all these little army guys to fight off the flu. But 6 months later, there's no more, well, there's antibodies, but the titer level is very, very low because you haven't been exposed to the flu for the last 6 months. So the reds on the IgG test are often the foods that you eat the most often because they have produced the greatest antibody response. But again, it doesn't mean that they're bad guys, and we don't know which it is, bad guys or trash. So the last test, and the one that I prefer, is called the MRT, or the mediator release test. And this is a live blood sample. So you get blood drawn and you ship it off to the lab right away. And this one is looking for an actual immune response. So they are taking these live samples, exposing them to the food antigens or the food, and then they're watching for an inflammatory response in these blood cells. And so we know when we remove those foods, we are removing sources of inflammation. And so if you're going to get food sensitivity testing, I would absolutely get an MRT test done. The one that I use, it uses 176 foods. There's 3, so you can get some that have smaller numbers on them as far as the number of foods. And that's a wonderful list. It doesn't cover them all. And there's still a few places in all of these tests where there's room for improvement. One of the things is, like, if you know you can't have milk, the MRT test might show that dairy is okay for you. And that may be because your body doesn't like milk in the digestion of it, but it doesn't cause an inflammatory response. So we may not see everything you already know your body doesn't like in there. And there may be other foods that cause problems that it doesn't say were problematic. But we at least know that everything that's flagged causes you an inflammatory response. We talked about sounds and lights, so I won't do that. We talked about snacking, so I won't go back to that one again. Except for one more thing, snacking. So we want no later than 3 hours before bedtime. And if bedtime's supposed to be between 9 and 11, that means set your snack clock for 6 to 8 p.m.
Gotcha. Okay. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that with the difference was with the testing, because I've done those tests before. It was a long time ago, but I still remember like coming back with like all of these foods I should be avoiding, which honestly I don't have issues with them. So yeah.
And so as you open your drains, a lot of those on the antibody tests won't be problems for you anymore because you've lowered the total inflammation level in your body. And so now they don't splash out of the bucket anymore.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. So one thing that I hear quite often from women is women who come to me because they're struggling with sleep and they will say, I've tried everything. What would you say to her?
I would say, first, check my list that we just went through. Have you really tried it all?
Yeah.
Because there's always lots that we can do. But if you genuinely have, the next thing I would say is that there's probably something going on underneath your hood, meaning there are probably some other issues that are raising your cortisol that you can't identify. And so I would hire a functional practitioner. I'm one, there are lots of us on the summit that are very capable of helping you. You want a practitioner that can run labs, and you want them to not run just one, you want them to run multiples. I like to think of it as reading out of a book. If I'm trying to give you a summary of a book, which is your overall health, if I just read chapter 1, I don't have a very good picture of what the story is telling me. And so we want to pick chapters 1, 4, 8, 10, and 12 so that we have a pretty good idea of where the story is going. And we can help you find those underlying stressors. I call them hidden stressors in my practice, but we want to identify what those are so that we can behavior change to correct them. And so try the ones up above, because a lot of times if you haven't tried those, those will help reduce that bucket load, and they'll help with the overall metabolic health. Even if you have other issues, better sleep is going to help with those as well. But if that's not working, it's time to move up.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for sharing these insights and helping us to look at sleep in such a hopeful and empowering way.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I was so grateful to be here today.
I'm so glad to have you. And I do believe that you have a gift for our listeners. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I have a sleep hacks resource, which has 3 tips to improving your sleep. The blue blockers that I recommend that you get, there's a link to those in there with a discount code. And then it kind of goes into some of the why you should tackle the sleep. You should change these 3 things first in your sleep routines.
That's wonderful. And can you tell our listeners where they would find you if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
Absolutely. Go to my website, which is angelwinghealth.com. I always like to think of angels as lifting you up and supporting you, and that's where my business hopes to help. So angelwinghealth.com. I am on Instagram I believe it's angel.wing.health on Instagram. And then I have a YouTube channel, which I don't post a lot on, but whenever I do talks, I put the talks out there. I've done several on nutrition, nutrition and cancer, nutrition and mental health, and nutrition for our kids. That's a big one in my world right now. And so that's also, I think it's at Angel Wing on YouTube.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Katie, for being here with us today. I truly appreciate you and your expertise.
My pleasure. This was delightful. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining us for the Holistic Menopause Solution Summit. Be sure to join us next time for another inspiring conversation to bring you holistic solutions for your peri to post journey. Bye, everyone.